When Daniel, heir to a vast fortune, proudly introduced his girlfriend, Amara, to his wealthy family, everyone noticed her grace, her smile, and her unusual necklace. But the moment Daniel's mother's eyes fell on it, her champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the marble floor. That necklace had belonged to someone she had loved and lost decades ago. And if Amara was wearing it, then an impossible truth was standing right in front of her. The Montgomery estate looked like something out of a dream or a movie. Endless green lawns rolled toward the gates, dotted with roses that looked as though they had been painted one by one. The mansion itself stood tall, gleaming in the afternoon sun, its marble pillars casting long shadows over the driveway. Inside, Margaret Montgomery, the elegant matriarch of the family, oversaw the final touches for the evening. Silver trays lined the dining table, crystal glasses shimmered in neat rows, and the scent of freshly baked pastries lingered in the air. Her son, Daniel, had told her he would be bringing someone special for dinner. Margaret had smiled politely on the phone, but had thought little of it. Daniel used the word special often. She stood at the top of the grand staircase, her silk gown flowing behind her like a whisper, when she heard the heavy front doors swing open. Daniel stepped inside, tall and confident, with his usual boyish grin. But this time, someone followed him. She was young, beautiful, and carried herself with quiet dignity. Her deep brown skin glowed against the soft cream of her dress. Her hair was styled into a neat bun, and her eyes, they were warm but cautious, as though they were measuring every detail in the room. "Mother," Daniel began, pride in his voice, "this is Amara." Amara smiled politely and extended her hand. Margaret hesitated for the briefest moment before shaking it. "Welcome to our home," she said, her voice smooth and polite, but her eyes taking in every detail. And then she saw it. The necklace. It was simple, strung with tiny, multicolored glass beads, the kind that looked handmade rather than bought from a store. The centerpiece was a small, oval pendant, carved from wood, its edges worn smooth from years of touch. It was not the kind of jewelry one would expect to see at a millionaire's dinner table. Margaret's breath caught. The room seemed to tilt. Her champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the marble floor. The sharp sound made both Daniel and Amara jump. "Mother, are you all right?" Daniel asked, stepping forward. Margaret did not answer immediately. She could not. Her eyes were locked on the necklace, her mind racing. She knew that piece, knew it as surely as she knew the lines of her own hands. It was not just familiar, it was impossible. She remembered another time, another face, the warm laugh of a woman with skin like Amara's who had once been the most important person in her life. The day that necklace had disappeared was the day her world had changed forever. Where did you get that necklace?" she asked finally, her voice low but sharp. Amara's eyes flickered with uncertainty. "It belonged to my mother," she said softly. "She gave it to me before she died." Margaret's heart hammered in her chest. She took a step closer, her hands trembling despite herself. "Your mother? What was her name?" Amara hesitated, glancing at Daniel, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Her name was Safina." The name hit Margaret like a blow. Her perfectly trained composure nearly cracked. That name belonged to someone from her past, someone she had never spoken about in this house, someone whose memory had been locked away, too painful to touch. She forced a brittle smile. "How interesting," she murmured. But inside, her thoughts were spiraling. It could not be true. And yet, it was the same necklace, the same name, the same eyes. Dinner was served moments later, but Margaret barely tasted a bite. Across the table, she studied Amara in silence, the way she held her fork, the curve of her smile, the quiet strength in her gaze, and with each passing second, one thought grew louder in her mind. If this girl is who I think she is, then my entire family's history is about to change forever.
The dining room glowed with the warm light of the chandelier, silverware gleaming under its golden hue. The table was set like a photograph in a luxury magazine, but the air was thick with an invisible tension. Margaret sat at the head, her posture perfect, her smile polite, but her eyes never left Amara. Daniel, oblivious to his mother's inner storm, filled the room with chatter. "Amara has been working on an amazing project with the community center," he said proudly. "She's teaching art classes for underprivileged kids." "That's admirable," Margaret replied, her voice carefully neutral. "Tell me, Amara, where did you grow up?" "In a small coastal town," Amara answered, her tone gentle but confident. "My mother raised me alone after my father passed away. She did everything she could to give me a good life." Margaret's fingers tightened slightly around her wineglass. She could picture Safina's face now, the same warmth in her smile, the same intelligence in her eyes. She remembered the day they had last spoken, the way Safina had worn that exact necklace. It had been a lifetime ago. "Your mother," she leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but searching. "Did she ever speak of Johannesburg?" Amara paused. "Yes, she lived there when she was younger, but she never spoke much about it, just that she had to leave quickly, and that it was painful for her to remember." A flicker of emotion, regret, guilt, crossed Margaret's face, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. Daniel, noticing none of this, laughed and reached for another slice of roast. "Well, she's here now, and I'm lucky she said yes when I asked her out." Amara blushed slightly, lowering her eyes, but Margaret's focus was elsewhere. Her thoughts were a whirlwind. If this is Safina's daughter, then she has no idea about the truth. The dinner continued, but Margaret's appetite had vanished. Every time Amara laughed, every time she tilted her head just so, Margaret saw Safina. And the necklace, that worn wooden pendant, seemed to glow under the soft light, taunting her with the memories it carried. When the plates were cleared, Margaret excused herself and walked slowly to the sitting room. She needed a moment away from their eyes. Her fingers brushed against a framed photograph on the mantel, a younger version of herself standing beside a smiling black woman in a modest dress, her arm around her shoulder. The woman's necklace was unmistakable. Her breath caught. She could hear footsteps behind her. Margaret had entered the room quietly, holding her handbag. "Mrs. Montgomery, I just wanted to thank you for having me tonight. I know I'm not what most people expect in Daniel's world." Margaret turned, her expression unreadable. "You carry yourself with grace, Amara. But I need to ask, did your mother ever tell you how she got that necklace?" Amara shook her head. "No, just that it was the most precious thing she owned. She wore it every day, even when she was sick." Margaret's lips parted, but no words came. Her heart was pounding in her chest. She was standing on the edge of a truth that she wasn't sure she had the courage to face. Before she could say more, Daniel entered the room, wrapping his arm around Amara. "Ready to go?" Amara smiled. "Yes." Margaret forced a smile in return. But as they left, she stood frozen in the middle of the sitting room. The sound of the door closing echoed through the house. She knew she couldn't ignore this. If Amara really was who she thought she was, then there was a story that had been buried for decades. A story that could shatter or change everything. And Margaret had just seen the first ghost of it in the beads around that young woman's neck.
Margaret did not sleep that night. She sat upright in her bed, still dressed, staring into the dark as the ticking of the old mantel clock filled the silence. That necklace! She could see it every time she blinked, its tiny beads, its carved wooden pendant, worn smooth by decades of touch. Safina's necklace, There was no doubt. It was the same one her best friend had worn on the day she vanished from Johannesburg all those years ago. Margaret rose from the bed and crossed the room to her wardrobe. She opened a hidden compartment in the back, one she had not touched in over 20 years. Inside was a small box of mementos, a faded photograph, a folded letter, and a dried sprig of lavender. She sat in the lamplight, staring at the photograph. It was her, much younger, standing beside a smiling young woman with luminous dark skin and eyes that could melt the coldest heart. Around Safina's neck, the very same necklace. Margaret's throat tightened. The photograph trembled in her hands. It cannot be a coincidence. The next morning, she phoned an old acquaintance in Johannesburg, someone who had been close to Safina in those days. "I need to know what happened to her," Margaret said, her voice low and urgent. There was a long pause. Then came the answer she feared. She left Johannesburg suddenly. No one knew why. Years later, word came she had a daughter, but she died young. No family claimed the girl. Margaret felt her breath catch. She gripped the phone so hard her knuckles whitened. The daughter's name? Amara. Margaret's chest tightened. There was no escaping it now. That afternoon, she drove into the older district of the city, where narrow streets wound between weather-worn buildings. She found herself outside the small brick church where she and Safina had sung in the choir together. Inside, sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting the pews with soft colors. The elderly caretaker recognized her immediately. "Margaret Montgomery, it has been many years." Margaret's voice wavered. "Do you remember Safina Ndlovu?" The woman's eyes softened. "Of course, she was pure kindness. When she disappeared, we all feared the worst. And that necklace she wore, she said it had been in her family for generations. She swore she would never take it off." Margaret closed her eyes. That image, Safina's smile, the necklace resting against her collarbone, burned into her mind. On the drive home, Margaret's thoughts swirled. If Amara was truly Safina's daughter, then she had walked into this house unaware she was carrying a piece of Margaret's buried past. That evening, Daniel called. "Mother, Amara and I are coming for dinner tomorrow. She wants to talk to you about something important." Margaret froze, gripping the phone. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Tomorrow, she would have to face the truth head-on. And for the first time in decades, Margaret felt fear. Not the kind that comes from strangers or danger, but the kind that comes when the past you thought was buried walks right through your front door wearing a beaded necklace. The next evening, the Montgomery estate was dressed for dinner again. But the air felt heavier, as if the walls themselves knew a secret was about to be spoken. Margaret sat at the head of the table, her hands folded neatly in front of her, though her fingers trembled ever so slightly. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. Daniel entered first, smiling, holding Amara's hand. She was wearing the same cream dress as before, and the same necklace. Its beads caught the chandelier's light, scattering faint glimmers across the polished table. Margaret's gaze locked onto it, her chest tightened. No more guessing, no more running. "Mother," Daniel said warmly, "you remember Amara?" "Yes," Margaret replied, her voice even. "Amara, may I speak with you privately before dinner?" Daniel hesitated. "Is something wrong?" "Please," Margaret said, her eyes fixed on Amara. Amara looked between them, curiosity flickering across her face. "Of course," she said softly. Margaret led her into the drawing room. The door closed behind them, sealing them away from the clinking of silverware and murmured conversation. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Margaret stepped closer, her voice quiet but trembling. "That necklace you wear, where exactly did you get it?" Amara touched it gently. "It was my mother's. She wore it every day.
She told me it had been in her family for generations. Margaret's throat constricted. And your mother's name was Safina? Yes, Amara said, her voice softening. She died when I was 10. I never knew much about her past. She never spoke about it. Why? Margaret's eyes glistened. She reached into her silk pocket and pulled out a small, faded photograph. She held it out with trembling fingers. It was two young women laughing under the summer sun, one unmistakably Margaret, the other a radiant black woman wearing that exact necklace. Amara's breath caught. Her eyes darted from the photograph to Margaret's face. That's my mother. Margaret's voice broke. She was my best friend, my sister in every way but blood. We made promises to each other, promises I failed to keep. She disappeared before I could make things right, and I spent years wondering if I would ever see her again. Tears welled in Amara's eyes. You knew her, really knew her? Margaret nodded, her tears slipping free. She saved me once. She stood by me when no one else would. And when she left, I lost a part of myself. They stood in silence, the years between them heavy in the air. Then Margaret reached out, her hand brushing the beads gently. I never thought I'd see this again. And yet here you are, wearing the last piece of her I remember. Amara swallowed hard. I wish she could have told me about you, about all of this. Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. Maybe she thought it was safer, or maybe she believed fate would bring us back together. She paused, then added, and perhaps it just did. At that moment, the door creaked open. Daniel peeked inside, puzzled. What's going on? Margaret turned to him, her face streaked with tears. Your Amara is the daughter of the dearest friend I ever had. A woman I loved like a sister. A woman I failed. Daniel froze, his eyes darting between them. You mean? Yes, Margaret said, her voice firm but warm. She belongs in this family, not because she is with you, Daniel, but because she is part of my heart's history. Amara's lip trembled. The weight of the moment pressed on her chest. She took a slow, shaky breath. Then maybe this isn't just about me and Daniel. Maybe this is about finishing something my mother started. Margaret smiled faintly through her tears. She stepped forward and drew Amara into a tight embrace, the kind that speaks of years lost and found again. When they emerged for dinner, the tension had melted into something softer, richer. The chandelier's light danced across Amara's necklace, no longer a mystery, now a bridge between past and present. And for the first time in decades, Margaret felt as if she had been given a second chance, not just to remember Safina, but to honor her through the young woman sitting beside her son.